So welcome to the Reclaim Our Canal webinar. I'm going to open the meeting with a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your continued blessings over the work of the John Birch Society. We ask you to send your Holy Spirit to enlighten our speaker in your truth, to impart wisdom upon our guests, that they receive the truth, and bestow courage, that we may use the truth. We ask that all our actions be prudent. In the name of our Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, amen.
Amen.
Okay, as this program advances and questions arise, maybe you can put them in a chat. Um, there should be like a global chat here. You guys can post questions in, and then um, and then let's try to keep our lines muted while Bill goes through his presentation. And let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Affleck. I'm a volunteer here in southeastern Pennsylvania. I come from a family of birchers. A couple of my brothers were running chapters. My father was a longtime bircher. I'm a lifetime member. Um, and now let me introduce Bill. William F. Jasper is the senior editor of the New American Magazine. He has a well-earned reputation as one of America's top investigative reporters, covering the UN conferences dealing with climate change. He writes extensively on the tyrannical drive of the global elite to destroy the independence of the United States. He's known for his expose of the Oklahoma City bombing and its aftermath. Hundreds of Bill's in-depth articles on the refugee crisis and immigration, terrorism and its origins, our loss of property rights, and the United Nations and its goal of world government have opened the eyes of many Americans to the threats they face. Bill has also authored two revealing books, Global Tyranny Step by Step and the United Nations Exposed. Bill also has a background involving the Panama Canal. I'm going to let him talk to you about that tonight. The subject is reclaiming our canal, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight, Bill.
Thank you, Mark, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, friends who are here tonight. And uh, who would have thought just a short time ago that we would be doing a webinar on this? I certainly didn't see it coming this soon in the new Trump administration, and I'm very elated, very excited, very gratified that this is happening. So, undoubtedly, there are some of you who are on this webinar tonight who remember, perhaps vividly, maybe vaguely or hazily, back in the 70s when the issue of the Panama Canal was a very ferociously debated and fervently fought battle. Uh, that was a long time ago. And those of us who were involved in those battles in the early, mid, and late 70s, and then again in the late 90s when the actual turnover of the canal was coming close, uh, felt that and knew that we were fighting a war on two fronts. We were fighting against international communists who had targeted the Panama Canal almost as soon as it was completed. It was completed in 1914. It was a wonder of the world. It was astounding. Most people kind of take it for granted now. They don't realize what an incredible achievement it was. But only 3 years after that, in 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Revolution, took over Russia, the Panama Canal was targeted then. And we know about this primarily, it first came to light by an American communist by the name of John Reed, who wrote the book 10 Days That Shook the World. He was an American communist. He was over in the Soviet Union, Russia at that time, at the Bolshevik Revolution, with his wife, uh, Louise Bryant. Some of you may remember in the 1970s, the big Hollywood movie made by Warren Beatty called Reds. It was about the life of John Reed and all the communists who were supporting the Bolshevik Revolution back then, all the intellectuals, from Greenwich Village and the left bank, Paris. Anyway, John Reed wrote in his book, 10 Days That Shook the World, that in 1917, the communists had targeted the Panama Canal back then. So we knew all the way up through the 20th century that as the communists took over one place after another, that the Panama Canal was always one of their key targets on the target list. And we'll go into some of the other details about that from Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, from uh, uh, Omar Torrijos and Manuel Noriega, key figures in the Panama Canal drama. But we knew there was another front that we were fighting on that was probably more determinative. In fact, clearly was more determinative, and that was the globalists within our own government who were working hand in hand with the communists. And so, those of you who are new to this, if you're not members of the Birch Society or haven't been following this for decades, this may be a totally new part of the story for you. And so, bear with us, and I'm going to be referring you to a number of the articles that we have published over the decades that go into this in some detail. This is all very important information, not just for those who are history buffs, but for anyone who wants to understand what is really happening all around us right now, because we are still fighting this two-front war against international communism and international globalism, which are connected together at the hip. So when we look at the Panama Canal, we'll talk a little bit about the canal itself and how it came about. And you're going to get a whole lot of misinformation and disinformation on that if you go to Wikipedia or any of the usual news sources. They are constantly telling us, for instance, just recently, because of the passing of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was president at the time that the treaties were signed, treaties, plural, in the 1970s. The two treaties, both of which were fraudulent. And Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, was really just the surrogate, the cat's paw that was used by both the communists and the globalists to effect this wresting away of this most important waterway in the world. No other waterway. The Suez Canal was important. Suez Canal was very important and strategic and still is for international commerce. But the Panama Canal is strategic and existentially important for the United States and for all people in the free world. It is important commercially, it's a lifeline, but it's completely strategically essential when it comes to military strategy, national security, national defense. And so, what we saw with the Panama Canal treaties in 1977 was a repudiation of U.S. sovereign territory in violation of international law, in violation of our Constitution, and in violation of common sense and of the protection of our nation. So that probably brings up a lot of questions in people's minds who might not be familiar with this. We'll try to answer all of that as we go along. But this is very important right now that President Donald J. Trump has brought this up after all of these years and has challenged the status quo. So those of us who fought these battles in the 1970s and the 80s, and then again in the 90s, and then again in the early 2000s, and we were constantly battling what now is very evident to all the Americans who voted in this last election as part of the MAGA movement, realizing that the media had completely lied to us over and over and over again, and nothing probably that you can think of right offhand comes close to the censorship, the control, the disinformation that we experienced back at the time of the Carter betrayal. It was betrayal. It was actually, I believe, and many others have called it treason. It was treason, transferring our canal. It was ours as much as Hawaii or Alaska or Puerto Rico or Guam or any of the other territories are U.S. sovereign territory. Handed it over after we had paid billions for it and expended tens of thousands of lives building it, lives lost to malaria, yellow fever, conquered all of that, paid all, for the property, the canal zone, many times over, and transferred it to, at that time, a communist run dictatorship under Omar Torrijos, who was working closely with Communist China, with Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, with Fidel Castro in Communist Cuba, with the Soviet Union, handed it over to that regime, and which was soon to be, as we pointed out many times in articles that you'll see there, soon to be transferred to the control of Communist China in violation of the treaties which President Carter fraudulently signed. So we have uh, today an opportunity that many of us had not given up hope of ever seeing, but it did not look like it was in the cards because we had had Republican and Democrat administrations come and go, and they had all capitulated or participated in this betrayal. So, although President Jimmy Carter is credited with effecting this treaty, this transfer, this betrayal, it really began in the Republican administration preceding him. It began with the actual movement to turn the canal over to Panama under Richard Nixon with his mastermind, Henry Kissinger, who has been over and over again the key architect of betrayals of America. He was the one who betrayed China and got us started building up China into the massive behemoth enemy that it is today. It was he who betrayed the POW MIAs in Vietnam over and over again. It was he who betrayed us with the Black September terrorist organization over and over again. We've done a lot of stories on Henry Kissinger. He, of course, was one of the architects of the New World Order in modern times for David Rockefeller and his Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. And we've written a lot about this. And these are the globalists who have been working hand in hand with the communists for the past century and have constantly betrayed our allies, betrayed the American people, aided our enemies. And in this case, with the Panama Canal, Henry Kissinger initiated the formal process for this by going to Panama, meeting with the Panamanian regime in 19. First, I might have this a little bit wrong. I've been working on other things, but I believe it was 1972. Then in 73, Leonid Brezhnev, Soviet dictator, and Kosygin came to Havana and met with Fidel Castro and with Panamanian representatives. And then they came to Washington, D.C. and met with Henry Kissinger. Then Henry Kissinger went down again to Panama and came up with the principles of agreement, which started the move toward claiming that Panama should, by right, take control of the Panama Canal and of the U.S. As we and many other authorities on the canal have pointed out, it's properly called the U.S. Canal in Panama. So in 1903, just real quick recap of history, the United States and Panama then, prior to that, was a, a state within the country of Colombia. The United States had been trying to sign a treaty with Colombia to create an isthmus canal through Panama. Uh, it made progress, but under the Haran Treaty, the Senate in Colombia decided they didn't want to go along with transferring the canal zone. In order to do the canal, this was going to be an enormous investment of blood and treasure. So in order to do that, the U.S. Congress said, well, we're not going to allocate any money for this unless we will have control over the canal. It's not right to take Americans' money and go spend it on a canal that someone else could take control over. So the Spooner Act, which had been passed in the late 1880s, uh, specified that any canal that United States citizens, taxpayers paid for, would have to be under U.S. control. And that was always the operating assumption and the assumption that all international authorities assumed that any country that is going to expend that kind of effort was going to be a Herculean thing. The French had already tried it. Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had been the hero of the Suez Canal, he had brought that to fruition, thought that this was going to be an easy thing to build one in Panama. And so originally the French were going to do it. They thought they would do it within a year or two. After 10 years and losing thousands of lives to yellow fever and malaria and constant challenges and tribulations caused by all the flooding and the terrible terrain there, terrible weather they had to deal with, they gave up. So with the uh, uh, Buenaventura Treaty of 1903, we made an agreement with the new Republic of Panama. These were people who broke away from Colombia and said, if the folks in the capital, Bogota, are not going to go along with it, we will. We want to have this here. We need the commercial and financial assistance because this is really a tropical hellhole in many ways. And if we don't succeed in getting a canal through here, then we're not going to be able to have any sort of prosperity or any future. At the time, there was also consideration, you may know, of building a canal through Nicaragua. And in fact, now, of course, that has been started again. Over the last 20, 30 years, Nicaragua, the communist government of Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega, has been flirting with communist China with their Belt and Road Initiative to build a canal through Nicaragua. And that just recently has kicked up again. So they may go forward with that. But clear back in the late 1800s, there was talk of a canal through there. That wasn't going anywhere. So that's a much longer canal, doesn't have the mountainous problems that you do in Panama. But Panama is only 51 miles wide there where they plan to do it, and a 10-mile wide zone. And so that was the plan that was settled on. And so in the Buenaventura Treaty with Panama, we paid the new government of Panama, $10 million, which was a lot of money back then, many times more than it's worth now, well over 100 times more than some would say, if you calculate inflation correctly and not as the way the Federal Reserve calculates it, would be a couple hundred times more than it was worth then. We paid the government of Panama. We paid the government of Colombia for their loss of Panama, paid them $20 million, again, in real money back at that time. And then we paid the private property owners of the canal zone again. And in the U.S. Documents that are in the congressional record, it gives every property owner in there and how much we paid them. And so we paid an enormous amount for that. And then we agreed to pay Panama a fee of $250,000 a year, which we paid year in and year out, and made Panama the wealthiest per capita country in Latin America at that time. Besides which, we ended up spending $6 to $8 billion of money at that time over the course of the 11 years that we built the Panama Canal, which was an incredible undertaking. And in fact, um, we've done a number of articles on this over the years, going clear back to most of you on the line, I'm assuming, are familiar with the New American magazine, of which I am a senior editor. But before we had the New American magazine, we had a monthly journal called American Opinion. And we had numerous articles in there over the years, and including, I just had one put up today by the late, great Alan Stang from 1977, the Panama Canal sellout. And it's very important. It's one of many which we did, which goes into both the communist and globalist hands that were involved in this treasonous sellout. And it is on our webpage, which, let me do a share here. We just did a experiment to see if I could do a share with it. Let me go up here to do a share. Okay. Oops. Yep. No. Okay. So let me do a share here. Okay. I'm not,
Yeah, we're not seeing it.
you're not seeing it. Okay.
What month was that, William?
So that was November of 1977, the Panama Canal sellout. I have
Well,
it here. I'm looking at
Bill,
it, but it's
Bill,
not
I'm gonna,
shared.
Bill, I'm gonna take the host back real quick and share it. Okay?
Okay. Now, can everyone still hear me? Should I keep talking?
Yeah, everybody can still hear you.
Okay. So anyway, in that article, Alan Stang does a great job of going through a lot of who's who and what's what going on at that time. And particularly, now I could be wrong, it might be in a number of our other articles, but I believe in that article, he goes into the background of General Omar Torrijos. Those of you who are, again, who are familiar with this battle going back to the 70s will remember that name. It was very prominent for a number of years. General Torrijos, and so the treaties are called the Torrijos-Carter treaties. And General Torrijos was never president of Panama, although he's often referred to as president of Panama. He was the dictator. In fact, he referred to himself in Castroite terms as the maximum leader of Panama. And he was a communist. He and his wife were both communists. His parents were both members of the Communist Party. And yet, we are told, I believe if you go to Wikipedia, uh, notorious source of sources, and you look up Omar Torrijos, it's the same in a lot of the rest of the media. They'll refer to Omar Torrijos as a right-wing dictator. And they'll say that he was opposed to the communists. That's absolutely ridiculous. Uh, he was a member of the Communist Party. His wife was, many of his other family members were. Most of his administration that he brought in were also uh, communist members. But as in many of the other revolutions, some of these communists fall out with each other and will fight amongst each other uh, for dominance. And that's all that we saw there. As I think I've already mentioned, he was very closely aligned with Fidel Castro, with Mao Zedong, with Zhou Enlai. So when Zhou Enlai died, the number two guy in communist China, uh, Torrijos sent him a eulogy to Zhou Enlai and told him how inspiring Zhou Enlai had always been to him. Zhou Enlai was a mass murderer like Mao Zedong. He also repeatedly said that Panama was following the path of Ho Chi Minh, the communist dictator of Vietnam. He was also very close to communist terrorist leader Muammar Gaddafi. He was very close to the Soviet Union, to Leonid Brezhnev. So anyway, that's who we were dealing with in Panama, and his leading negotiators with us were also communists. One was Romulo Escobar Betancourt, not to be confused with Romulo Ernesto Betancourt, who was from Venezuela, also a communist, one of the communist dictators of Venezuela. They have a similar name, just middle names a little bit different. But Romulo Escobar Betancourt was a communist. He was one of those. If you do a search on the Panama Canal treaties, you'll see that he and Juan Antonio Tack were the main negotiators for Panama. And so who were the negotiators for our side? Well, there were a couple that were of importance. We already mentioned Henry Kissinger. He had been superseded as the Democrats came into power by one of his colleagues, Ellsworth Bunker. Ellsworth Bunker, Council on Foreign Relations member and globalist, pro-communist, worked with the communists, not only in Latin America on the Panama Canal, but he was infamous in Vietnam for um, uh, subverting our interests in Vietnam and helping the communists there. The other main interest there, or rather negotiator for our side, was again not on our side. That was Saul Linowitz, former corporate chairman of Pan American Airlines. I believe it was Pan American Airlines. Anyway, he was also at the time a very close ally, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, an ally of David Rockefeller. And the Rockefeller family was really at the heart of this. You see throughout all of Latin America, at the end of the 50s and starting in the 60s, the Rockefeller family initiated several very important Latin American think tanks and groups, the Council on the Americas, the Inter-American, several of them, which I've gone into detail in several previous articles. David Rockefeller was always the chairman and the main financer of it. David Rockefeller was the chairman at the time of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he had launched a more elite group that was international in scope, the Trilateral Commission, which most Americans had not heard of in the early to mid 70s. But Jimmy Carter had been chosen by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had given David Rockefeller the idea for forming this commission, which would, it was called Trilateral because it would bring together top globalist leaders from Europe, the United States, and Japan. And eventually that Japan would be, first it was just Japanese leaders, would be other Asian leaders. So we then had Singapore and Malaysia, and particularly China brought on board in the last couple of decades. But this was a much more elite level globalist organization of at first, just a couple hundred, and it's still only a few hundred members, a little over 350, I believe now. But Jimmy Carter, really a nobody, a relatively unknown Democrat governor from Georgia, was brought on as one of the key members of the Trilateral Commission, and he was made into President of the United States with all of the influence that the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, globalist media could bring to bear to push him to the forefront of the US election. And so in 1976, he was elected, and one of his first programs was to give away the Panama Canal, something during his campaign that he had promised he would not do. That was one of his campaign pledges, because this was a lightning rod issue at that time. And of course, it was a lie. He also said, "I will never lie to you." That was another one of his lies. So he knew, because he was really an agent for David Rockefeller. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had formulated and been the architect creating the Trilateral Commission for David Rockefeller, was, of course, Jimmy Carter's mentor.
Okay, looks like we have an interruption here. Hang on a second, see if I can get him back on. If you're not aware, we do have the Reclaim Our Canal page at jbs.org now. And some of the articles that are being mentioned tonight are going to be linked in here. We already have a few up. There's also a YouTube video that Jack McManus did in the early 2000s. Let me give a link to that. I'm going to put this in the chat, global chat for us all.
We're back.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I'm putting a link to Mr. McManus's talk in the global chat to everyone. It's going out there right now. And I shared out the JBS Claymore Canal page.
Good.
I expect we'll have more articles post on there as time goes by, and maybe even the video.
Yes, I'm queuing up a number of other articles for them to put up there.
Okay.
And so, yeah, keep watching that page, and then we will probably bring up some of the other videos that are in the archives on that. So one of the people that I'm hoping we're going to be able to get up pretty soon, if we can find the video, is Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You'll see in the links that you put up, we have an article by him and an interview I conducted with him in print for the New American, along with Admiral Mark Hill. And both of them are very important in this. There were others too, Captain Russell, G. Russell Evans, Harold Lord Varney, other people who were experts on this, whom we have had articles by and whom we have interviewed. So yeah, keep a watch on it. This is important. They played important roles. All of them are gone now, but during all the heat of these battles, Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, truly an incredible guy. He was the only pilot. He was a naval aviator. He was the only pilot to get his plane up, a PBY, the flying boat, at Pearl Harbor. And he was able to track the Japanese Zeros and to where they were coming from. Anyway, he had quite a heroic career. And then after he retired, he was a very important voice in the battle for the Panama Canal. And now, even that he's gone, his expertise and his background is still playing a role in this. I was honored to, along with Jack McManus, to meet up with him in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol, to meet with Helen Chenoweth, who is a longtime personal friend of mine, and from my home state of Idaho, was one of the champions on the Panama Canal. And you'll see the article that we did. We published a couple of hers, one of which is her proclamation, her resolution, which she tried to get Congress to pass, declaring that the so-called treaties were invalid, were null and void, and that Congress should recognize that, and that the president should take back control of the Panama Canal, so of the U.S. Canal in Panama. And so Jack Manis, you just posted his video, which is on YouTube, and thank you for doing that. I didn't realize that that was still up there on YouTube, Mark, until you brought that to my attention. Jack does a very excellent job in that. I think it's about a 40-minute presentation of going through much of what I've covered tonight, and giving quite a bit of detail on who was who, what was done, going through the treaties. And this is the kind of thing that we have to resurrect and promote, to bring people up to speed and to create the public awareness that will enable and prompt and prod members of Congress in the House and in the Senate to step up and do their jobs. Ultimately, that's what it's going to require. President Trump can and should take the initiative on this. We can and should put and must put troops in Panama and take back control of our property, not wait until the Chinese actually take control of it and put their troops in there or sabotage it. And then we go, oh my, now we have to go in and take control of it in a wartime or a conflict short of war situation, and then face not only having not access to it, but having to repair it if it can be repaired in a time of conflict. So I've already covered a lot of material. There's so much more that can and perhaps should be covered, but what do you think, Mark? Should I just open up for questions now, or do you have something more? I could go into the treaties in some more detail. Probably the only, let me just go into one thing on the treaty. This is the most.
Bill, could you clarify? You talked about Chenoweth's resolution to nullify the treaties. You should specify what treaties you're talking about. You're talking about the
Yes, so
treaties
there,
Go ahead.
yes, so we've talked about several treaties. One was the Hay-Huron Treaty. That was prior to the Panama Canal. Then we had the Hay-Buenaventura Treaty, which was 1903. And that's what gave us the canal, or rather we bought the canal. And in it, it specifies that we shall have control, ownership of it, sovereignty over it in perpetuity, forever. Same as the Alaska Purchase, Hawaii, any of the other. So the 1977 treaties, we'll just briefly go into that right now. And if anyone has more questions, we'll go into it deeper. But here's the main thing that we still haven't seen President Trump, unless maybe it's happened in the last 48 hours and I missed it or something. We haven't seen President Trump or anyone in his administration mention uh, that the treaties themselves are invalid. He has, in initiating his claims that we should take it back, he points to Communist China taking control of the ports on both sides of the Panama Canal on the Pacific and the Atlantic sides, and the facilities within the Panama Canal zone. So that is in violation of the invalid treaties. So even if they had been valid, that would invalidate it because according to the treaties, no third party, no foreign entity would control any of the ports or the facilities within the zone. It was only to be under Panama's control. Well, that the fact that China has taken over, and this is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, in which they are flooding all of Latin America with billions of dollars in projects, in contracts, in bribes that are corrupting the whole region. And Panama has been one of their prime targets. So just on that point alone, the treaties, the two treaties, one was the neutrality treaty and one was the transfer treaty. Both of them are invalid. For one thing, which we haven't even gone into, when we purchased the property, it became U.S. territory. And so U.S. territory under our Constitution may not be disposed of simply by a vote in the Senate, by a treaty. For U.S. territory, sovereign territory to be disposed of, the House of Representatives has to vote on it too. And that was never done. So the U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1907, Shaw versus Wilson, and three other Supreme Court decisions, as well as international experts who have weighed in on it, have agreed that yes, this is sovereign territory of the United States. It's plain in the treaties. So that is one of the major problems with the treaties and renders them invalid. But there's another one, and this is the one that we have focused on mostly, and that is that President Carter, at the behest of his controllers, deceived the American people, deceived the Senate, and of course, many in the Senate were willfully deceived. They wanted to be deceived. He convinced them that they could vote for these treaties because of the DeConcini reservation. And we've written about that in detail in the articles, but let me just briefly state it. So Senator Dennis DeConcini, Democrat from Arizona, was going to be the cat's paw for this. Carter and his controllers prevailed on Dennis DeConcini. They said, look, we can't get this passed in the Senate unless we convince enough senators, give them protective coloration so that they can claim, well, we don't have to worry about having access to the canal in a time of war because the United States, under this reservation, the United States can go in with military force without permission of Panama anytime the security of the canal is threatened. And so it was a false protection in the first place, because if you wait until the canal is threatened, it could already be bombed, it could already be destroyed, it could already be sabotaged before you get in there. But this was going to give enough senators camouflage, protective color that they could vote for it and say, well, we satisfied that concern. But here is the main problem. Omar Torrijos and the government of Panama did not accept the DeConcini reservation. And President Carter knew they wouldn't accept it. Saul Linowitz knew they wouldn't accept it. Ellsworth Bunker knew they wouldn't accept it. In fact, Torrijos said, we can't accept that. So Carter says, okay, you come up with your own reservation. And Torrijos did. And Carter did not tell the Senate that Torrijos was not agreeing to the DeConcini reservation. Now, as we pointed out in many of our articles, as Helen Chenoweth points out, as Admiral Moore points out, as the esteemed Dr. Breacher, the international expert on treaty law who testified before the Senate, and we have his testimony on that webpage as well. It's one of the most fundamental precepts of international law and of treaties is that both parties have to have the same treaty, the exact same wording, and sign on to the same agreement. It's the same with you or I when we have any contract. If I'm buying your house and I say, I'm buying your house for X amount of dollars, but you have to shovel the walks for the next 10 years. And you say, well, no, I'm going to, in my contract, it has a different amount and I don't have to shovel the walks, then we haven't had a meeting of the minds. We're not signing the same agreement. It wouldn't hold up in any court of law. And that's what we have with the Panama Canal treaties. And what is so important to understand here, and I've already mentioned it once, is that this could have never happened. It could have never passed without the complicity, the total complicity, conspiracy on the part of the controlled media who kept this quiet. They knew about it. We know they knew about it because we publicly made this known. Senator Jesse Helms made it known. Senator Strom Thurmond made it known. A number of others did as well. And they went ahead with this anyway. So the fact that this deception has gone on now for over 40 years does not erase the truth, the fact that this was a total deception. It was a fraud. The treaties are invalid. And now more than ever, we are imperiled. We were reporting clear back in the late 1980s, and then certainly in the 90s, you'll see in some of those articles about how the Soviet presence in Panama was largely replaced by the communist Chinese presence, principally through the Hutchison Whampoa company, Li Ka-shing, the billionaire communist mogul in Hong Kong, who was working and still working with communist China with the CCP. They have pretty much taken over the whole canal zone, all of the facilities, the ports, etc. And so now push has come to shove, and it's time to take back our canal. So with that, I'll let you.
I appreciate you straightening out the treaty business. I didn't want
Oh.
people to have to. I didn't want people to leave the meeting not understanding which treaties you were talking about. So that's good. I do have a couple messages here. There was a question. What motivation did Carter and his gang have to turn the ownership of the canal over to Panama when they did?
Well, very good question. Why would we do something which is so manifestly opposed to America's national interest? And this is where it gets to treason and bribery. So there were multiple, as in most of these cases that we've dealt with of betrayal and conspiracy, there are multiple motivations and people at different levels with different motivations, and sometimes several at the same times with the same actors. So let's look at some of the facts. I mentioned that Saul Linowitz was one of the main negotiators uh, prior to Carter coming in, and then as Carter's negotiator. He had run something for David Rockefeller, really called the Linowitz Commission on Latin America. And he became he was a big negotiator for the New York banks. David Rockefeller, of course, was chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, which was not the largest bank in the world, but the most influential bank. It had the contacts with all of the heads of state. Rockefeller could fly into any communist country, any capitalist country, any third world country, and be recognized by all of the top leaders, and all doors were open to him. The red carpet was thrown out to him. In fact, you can go on PBS and look at the old video that Bill, oh shoot, I can't think of his last name. Anyway, one of their, he was a CFR member. He was one of their main hosts on PBS. He did a fly around the world with David Rockefeller as he went to all the capitals, and he was in awe that David Rockefeller could go in and meet with all the communist leaders, could go and meet with anyone. So David Rockefeller and the Linowitz gang. What was Saul Linowitz's role in this? Well, he was a key executive at the Marine Midland Bank, which was one of the principal banks at the time that was part of the Rockefeller orbit and that had made millions of dollars of loans to Panama. A whole consortium of banks began pouring billions of dollars into Panama. Why? Well, because they helped Omar Torrijos set Panama up as a banking capital. And so even though he was most of the people in the history books will tell you he leaned Marxist. No, he was an actual communist. But he set up a banking capital there. So all of the big banks, including Chase Manhattan, Marine Midland Bank, rushed in there to give millions of dollars to Panama as bribes, and they could flush their money through there and launder it. So, but they had Omar Torrijos was spending the money as fast as they would give it to him or loan it to him. And in fact, he owed many hundreds of millions of dollars to the various banks. They knew they were not going to get that back unless they got the American taxpayers to pay for it. So, as part of the Carter treaties, we ended up bailing them out. And so there was that motivation on the part of Saul Linowitz and the banks that he was representing. But as in most cases where the big bankers and corporate investors and hedge fund guys are putting money into communist regimes like China or whatnot, yeah, they have a motive to make money and get richer at taxpayers' expense. But there is something above that for those who are the real globalists. They really are building a new world order. And this new world order that they envision cannot take place if there is a strong, independent United States of America, which is sovereign and free. And it will always be that way unless it can be brought low. And how do you bring it low? You load it up with all kinds of taxes and regulations and destroy the productive capacity by moving all of its production and manufacturing outside of the country, which they started at this same time that they were uh, destroying our hold on the Panama Canal. They began the big transfer of all of our manufacturing and technology to communist China, as well as to Mexico, communist Vietnam, and other countries, but primarily to China. And if you're going to, and this is happening at the same time that China was being brought into the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, and being held up as the new miracle model of central planning. And so that's why you see at all these Davos gatherings where you have people like billionaires Ray Dalio and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and all of these, David Rubenstein, all of these globalist CFR members praising Xi Jinping and the new China model, George Soros, Bill Gates. Uh, and they're all running back and forth to China, to Beijing, to the Bao Forum, etc., praising China. Now you see a few of them for the past couple of years because of the Trump effect. They're feigning a concern about communist China, but most of them are still engaged in very heavily in investing there. So the Panama Canal and uh, the huge uh, play that it represents, I believe, has to be seen in the context of that whole move by the globalists working together with the communists toward what they have constantly called their New World Order. That
Okay,
makes sense?
very good, very good. Then there's a follow-up on this. This is kind of interesting. Wasn't presidential candidate McCain determined to be a U.S. natural citizen based on the fact that he was born in the Panama Canal
In the
Zone?
Panama Canal Zone? Yes. Yes. So uh, the constitutional requirement of being a natural born citizen came up during a couple of times uh, during his consideration and during his running for president. And that's a whole big issue in and of itself. But yes,
So
he was born in the Panama Canal. So
that would lend credence to the concept that,
yeah,
Panama was sovereign territory.
yeah.
Although I guess the same would hold for the child of a soldier, even on a base in a foreign country.
Yes, that has been, I believe, adjudicated a few times. Never been definitively uh, decided, I guess. But in general, those who are born in U.S. territory by military personnel serving there are considered U.S. citizens.
Yeah. So I got an interesting anecdote here. Someone, this is, well, maybe I shouldn't. Should I give a name? Maybe I better not. Uh,
Okay.
okay. Elaine says that she says, my husband and I were the last government contractors who prepared the last bases and facilities for turnover. It was so sad to see the passage of our vision and endeavor end at the closing ceremonies on July 30th, 1999 at Fort Clayton. We loved Panama. We did not stay there because of the major influx of Chinese influence and ownership of property on both sides of the canal territory. God bless the USA and thank you for the webinar. Well, thank you,
Hmm.
Elaine.
Well,
Appreciate
Yeah.
Elaine, if you would like to, I'd like to talk with you and your husband about that. Give me uh, an email at wjasper@thenewamerican.com.
Sure, I'd love to do that. As a matter of fact, we just had Paul Gosar down here in our neighborhood, and we were blessed with meeting him, and I ended up giving him all the final closing ceremonies and brochures about the whole history of Panama Canal. But you've added so much more. Thank you so much.
Well, yes, Paul Gosar would be a very good uh, candidate for reintroducing Helen Chenoweth's resolution. And maybe you could get him to do it. We have a couple other very good congressmen who are interested in it, but they said, well, I don't know enough about it. I wouldn't be able to feel like I'd be up to speed to doing it. I'd support it, but I don't want to introduce it because I should know more about it before I sponsor it. So, all of you who are on this call, it would behoove us for you to contact your representatives and your senators, uh, send them some of the materials that we've already talked about tonight and that we linked to, and let's find someone who will take up this cause.
I ran out of questions in the chat. If anyone else is on that has a question they want to raise before we close, you can do that. I'm going to post my email here in the chat to everyone. So if you want to we might do this again. If you want to get notified when we do it again, you have to pop me an email, okay? But let me put my email in here for you. Contact me. Yeah, so send me an email after this meeting ends if you want to be notified the next time we do this. Uh, Bill is saying that he may have some documents that he would like to share the next time. He has some other materials that he may share in a part two. So uh, I know that a number of people received invites to this and were not able to log in because of I guess what I sent out wasn't shared properly to other people. So we're thinking about doing it again. um,
And if folks have some suggestions of things that would be better for me to cut out or to add, let me know. We'll be
yeah,
glad to try to accommodate you. I was hoping to have time to put together uh, some graphics that would show the global map, the isthmus, the canal, photos of some of the figures that we're talking about. But for the next one, we should be able to put that together.
yeah, yeah. And we had a comment by Janet that she was talking about some of the violence that was raised in the late 70s, 1979. Uh, because of safety concerns, people had to leave the area. American citizens had to leave the area. Some of the kids and the father stationed there, just to
Well,
escape
there were
violence.
Americans who were actually killed, American citizens in the zone or outside of the zone who were taken, killed a couple of, at least a couple, maybe more, who were hacked to pieces with machetes. And so, yeah, I got rather ugly there. And it was
Some
again
and
Fidel Castro.
some of that was pushing the vote, right? Some of
Oh
that,
yes, yeah,
yeah,
it was kicking that up, and a lot of that was censored out. Most of it was censored out. In fact, Geraldo Rivera, at that time, I believe it was with ABC. He might have been with CBS at that time. He was down there with a crew, and he later said that he censored that, didn't let it out because they didn't want the American public to know about it, and he wanted the Canal treaties to be ratified.
yeah, yeah.
I was going to say my brother was stationed there between 72 and 74 in Panama. He was a Green Beret. So he was I was just reading, talking to him. He was telling me, you know, I don't know. I was 10 years old, Bill. So when he was there, but I know it was pretty ugly. He said you couldn't anyway. So
Well, Matt, tell your brother if he'd like to talk to me about it, either for publication or not. I'm always looking for background information like that, so I'd be glad to talk with him.
yeah, I was just texting him and stuff like that. It just came out of my memory
Mm.
that I remember him, being gone for a while. So he didn't say it was good though. It wasn't a cakewalk. I could tell you that. He said it was ugly at times. So
Yeah.
But the thing that was the point that was made by Carter and the advocates of the canal, they said, "Well, see this violence. It's just going to continue. It's going to escalate, and there's no way that we can defend this. We'd have to send in hundreds of thousands of troops." It's not true. Panama had no army. They had a National Guard. They had no Navy. They had no Air Force. And to think that we could build a canal like that with all of its fortifications and everything, and with all of our might, that we could not control and defend, that is ludicrous. And it points to the fact that the reason why we need to have our troops already there. So so
Uh,
anyway, I thank everybody. I will Mark, let you take it away.
yeah, I did record this. I'll clean it up and I'll put it on YouTube or something like that in case people want to check back in on it and brush up on some of the issues. If you guys send me an email, I don't know if I can capture what's in this chat. Maybe I can, but if you want to send me an email, let me know. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll give you links to the video, and then I think we should probably wrap this up, Bill. I want to thank everybody for attending. Um, and like I said, I'll notify you if we have another session. Okay.
Thanks,
Very good.
Thanks,
guys.
Bill.
Mhm. Good night for now.
Good
God
night.
bless to everyone.
God bless you too.